the unfortunate thing about growing up in the hood is like you're not immune
Yeah.
because you have a father.
Yeah.
And what I will tell you, like my dad was an amazing man, but the unfortunate thing is every day I gotta walk through the neighborhood to get to somewhere,
Yeah.
whether it be school or what have you. And so you're always subjected to the elements.
The crossroads.
Yeah.
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 Or
And so
right or left.
the unavoidable.
Yeah.
And as I talk about in my book, Life is My Guru, the frustrations of the ghetto are always spilling out into the streets.
Yeah.
There's always this tension
Mm-hmm.
that you become almost intuitive of, that you're constantly under pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And, growing up in the 80s and the 90s where it was so violent, and not only violent, but also an age where I think a lot of people were trying to make their mark in life, you begin to see very quickly, you become very influenced by everything around you too.
Yeah. And even our first impressions as young men coming up in the 80s and 90s, the original social media was music.
Yep.
In a way, it's like,
Yep.
it used to be very wholesome, and then it even switched and got aggressive with rap music.
Yeah. That was our source of inspiration.
It was great storytelling in a lot of capacities, but that was our first social media that left a lot of impression on us too,
Yeah.
in different capacities. So, same thing growing up in Chicago. I don't know if you're ever familiar with Chicago.
Yeah, I'm familiar.
Okay. Which parts you been in?
South and the west side of Chicago.
Yeah. So historically, for the people that don't know, South Side is like comparing Brooklyn to Harlem when it comes to the West Side.
Yeah. Yeah.
Two different cultures, two different cities, two different sources of inspiration and more. And even the redlining was different in
Yep.
that capacity. Chicago is very segregated. And growing up in those 90s led me, like you said, to have these different crossroads, like we talked about, go left or go right. You had a positive role model, it sounds like you had in your life in one capacity, and then you had an influence over here in a different capacity.
Yep.
And like you, like I seen my first murder at the age of 5, seeing a man brains blown out in front of me because he decided to hit a group of young teenagers. It was a hit and run, drunk, since he was a drunk driver. And again, the foundation of gangs back then was to protect. And it happened in real time where the gang, specifically these vice lords, just rang out and shot him right there for trying to get away from that crime where he hit a 12-year-old girl, 12-year-old girl that was, fortunate enough to be impacted by his car.
Yeah.
So that was my first experience with violence, and definitely wasn't my last experience with violence at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing is, you look out, looking out of my project windows, you see all of these different like characters. It's like a play.
Yeah, it is.
Like going on every day. And I always tell people like the best movie ever is Living in the Hood. Like if you want to just like, you see all like the movies like Spike Lee made, and you see all these people who just sit on the perch and look outdoors. They're looking outdoors because there's always something happening. It's a movie going on all the time, and there's different characters.
So many moving characters, so many complexities too, as well. From the wino on the corner to to the corner boys and the hustlers, and more to Myrtle that's on another porch, somebody's grandmother, auntie, keeping tabs on what's happening. So you're right. It's a movie. It's a pretty interesting movie. I think, in fact, Nas was one of the great. He did a song called "My Project Window." I believe
he did.
Really great description of what he was describing in terms of what we're talking about too. Such as
a window means something totally different in the hood.
It totally does.
Like most of my friends, because we live in the bottom level. Most of my friends didn't come to the door; they just came to my window and or come out the window, go through the window. So like, it was different, but it was literally like a movie. And the one movie that that really sort of inspired me lately was: have you seen the movie They Cloned Tyrone? Uh,
I seen half of it.
Okay,
I didn't
cool.
get all the way to the back of it because I did, full transparency, watch it very late at night
Gotcha.
and fell asleep along. But it was good.
Yeah.
It looked good, and I had to still finish it up.
Yeah, you
So
got to finish it
yeah,
for it to
yeah,
mean anything. But
yeah,
in the movie, they're projecting these stereotypical archetypes
yeah.
of the black female and the
Mm,
black male in the movie. And if you've seen it or you haven't seen it already,
yeah.
I'm gonna bust it all up for you.
Sure.
But you got Fontaine, the drug dealer.
Yep.
You got Slick, the pimp,
Yep.
and then you got Yo-Yo, the prostitute.
Yeah.
So those are the three primary archetypes in the movie. And in the beginning, it looks like this typical hood movie, but then you see this trio,
Hmm.
the pimp, the drug dealer, and the prostitute. They discover this nefarious plot of the system trying to perpetuate these stereotypes in the neighborhood
Mm.
through cloning these different people. So every time you see a pimp go down, another one grows out of the ground like a plant.
Yeah.
You know, every time you see a drug dealer get killed, another drug dealer pops up the next day.
Yeah.
Same thing with the prostitute, same thing with every different archetype that you're seeing in the media, that you see in the hood.
Yeah.
And what I loved about it is that you seeing the system not only perpetuate these stereotypes, but you're seeing it as a form of control to keep these stereotypes in place,
Hmm.
and also as a form of like forced assimilation.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
what I noticed was like in my experience, what I saw all the time was, especially after I went through what I went through, like I was telling you earlier, when I was 12, I watched my best friend kill another friend
Mm.
with a bat.
Mm.
And then I had another friend who committed a double homicide. He went to prison. I had my best friend and cousin get killed they stole a car.
Mm.
And so by the time I'm 12, 13 years old and experienced all of this, nobody's asking, like, you know, does this kid need therapy? Nobody's asking, you know, why is he acting out the way he does?
Yeah.
Nobody's asking these questions. And then what happens is, as a result of going through all of those things, I act out and I become one of those stereotypes.
Sure. Statistic. Yeah.
Yeah, I become a statistic because essentially what I'm trying to do is act out the hurt that I can't actually show.
Yeah.
Because if you show hurt in the hood, you show any kind of
Weakness.
weakness, then it's going to be pounced upon.
Absolutely.
That's at least the perception that I had.
Yeah.
So as a result of that, I become one of the parts in the movie,
Yeah.
and I become a puppet, and I become part of the self destruction for a very small period of my life in my community. End up having a son when I was 15. Everything you can imagine a kid shouldn't do,
Yeah.
I got involved in. And I want you to talk a little bit about what it's like to grow up in an environment of violence, poverty, and unhealthy social norms. And then the social pressure, as I mentioned before, like I can't even smile. Like,
Yeah.
and to be honest with you, I was the kind of kid, like, I love being by myself. I love running off into like some woods somewhere, collecting some rocks, some whatever. I was that kind of kid. But because of the social pressures of saying, I can't be that kid, because if I'm that kid, that's when I get attacked.
Mm.
What is it like to be thrown into one of these clone archetypes without even knowing it?
It's funny because you do feel like it's an experience, and you can probably agree with me where, in hindsight, now that we have separated ourselves from that timeline, and we are very different men and human beings than we were previously. Um, what we were doing and participating in, for good or worse, was just the norm.
Yeah.
Like we didn't feel. I didn't feel poor. You didn't feel poor. We didn't feel like we was violent, man. We felt like this is just the law of the land, right?
The law.
This is the jungle,
Yeah.
and only the fittest survive, in that capacity. So it was definitely something. It took me to go to federal prison to really sit down with myself. We all live in a world where people think they know themselves, and in my experience, the true people that really, really do know themselves from inside to out to head to toe are people serving long time prison sentences in institutions or soldiers at war where you have the time to be removed from a very busy, distracted society that's pushing different propaganda and agendas all over the place.
Yeah.
And you have a chance to really do a deep dive to who you are, what triggers you, and more. And it was not until I went into prison until I was able to really process my prior years as a young man and realize some of the things I was doing, that's not normal. That's not healthy. That's not okay. Uh, I didn't even know about therapy or any form of therapy until I was a older human being. I
Yeah.
didn't know anything about food and nutrition or the difference between a complex and simple carb until I was an adult.